Superstorm 93 is sponsored by Axo Salt Incorporated, the leading producer of de-icing salt. Salt saves lives.
Icy roads can be a problem even for professional drivers. To feel secure about winter driving, travel on the road de-iced with salt. Halite, the same rock salt the pros use on highways. Tests show that salt reduces accidents by 88.3%. So when you drive, stay on the road de-iced with salt.
From the Weather Journal, a special presentation. In early March, winter dealt a sweeping and deadly blow. The winds howled from Florida to Maine. Coastlines were ravaged. Across much of the eastern United States, all movement stopped, buried under the weight of the blizzard. It was a storm like few had ever seen. Superstorm 93.
Across Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, the winter storm of '93 began as rain, thunder, snow, and sleet. By storm's end, over 230 people would lose their lives. The impact would be felt from Cuba to Canada. Earlier that week, even before people saw the first effects, forecasters identified the ingredients that would create this superstorm.
Primarily, there were three things. One, a very big late-season Arctic outbreak plunging down pretty much right over the North Pole and down into the lower 48 of the United States. Second ingredient was warm, humid air lurking over the Gulf of Mexico, Florida, and the Gulf Stream, and the warm waters themselves. And last but not least, very big dip in the jet stream, a couple disturbances helping carve that out, and that created this immense cluster of thunderstorms over the Gulf of Mexico, and once that happened, everything just went crazy. This one had everything came together perfectly, and the rest is history.
But it's not going to be a 2 or 3 day event. It won't have to be. It's going to go down in the record books. Bet on that.
In the Gulf of Mexico, winds increased to hurricane force. Water began to batter the coastline of northwestern Florida.
About another hour before it's high tide, so you know we're going to have some water down here.
By early morning, the storm surge reached 10 feet in places. The beach communities of Taylor and Dixie counties were caught by surprise.
Absolute horror is all I can tell you. We did not get enough warning, and nobody realized it would be this bad. If we knew there was going to be flooding, we would have left.
And I kept thinking it was going to let up, but it never let up. It just kept coming. Well, I watched my house fold pieces at the time, and I was standing on the back deck, and when the back deck went to fall in, that's when I got off of it. And there wasn't no fighting it. We just swam with it and let it carry us till we got to where we could touch ground.
Waves and debris crushed homes, tossed cars, and destroyed lives.
And I was so scared, and I was praying. And I was praying and praying and praying, and I'd fall on my knees, and I started hearing people scream for help. And there was a gentleman, the first one that come through between the firehouse out there and the house, and I was in that bedroom window right up there. And I had my window open at that time because it was coming mostly from this direction. And I said, honey, hold on to something. He said, oh, God, somebody help me. And I screamed as loud as I could scream. And I said, grab something and hang on. And I never did hear another word from him, and they found him under that debris pile out there, and he lost his life.
9 other residents in the beach communities lost their lives during the storm. For many people, the water rose so fast, escape was impossible.
When we came out to walk out, the car was floating. The truck had already drifted off, and we just decided, I told her,
the boat was gone, everything was
we'd better
going.
just stay here. In just a few minutes, the front part of the old trailer began to just disintegrate.
Ray and Lucy Bailey, in their 80s, managed to hang on to this palm tree for 4 hours, their heads just above water. They were finally rescued by neighbors.
It was hard work to stay in that tree. I think a desire to live had a lot to do with it.
Within hours, the water was gone, and so were entire rows of houses. In Dixie and Taylor counties, over 500 structures were destroyed. Another 500 were damaged. Although the forecast for the storm was accurate, emergency management officials were surprised by the magnitude of the tidal surge and the destructive power of the winds.
We believe that the storm was underestimated, the flooding part of the storm. I think people were aware we were going to have some severe weather, primarily tornadoes and things of that nature, but the flooding, the tidal surge, we believe was underestimated, and these are things that we need to work on. So we do have that lead time to move people out of the low-lying areas, so we're not impacted with the flooding.
How did the storm create such a large surge? As the low-pressure system intensified in the Gulf of Mexico, the winds ahead of the storm strengthened out of the south. This may have helped pile water up into the northeastern Gulf. Strong westerly winds then swept in to create the main storm surge, which reached 9 to 12 feet in places.
This was rather unprecedented now. You have to remember in its scope. It's almost unheard of to get that kind of a storm surge from a storm in the Gulf of Mexico in a non-tropical system, and that's what this was.
The storm threatened lives at sea as well as on land. The Coast Guard rescued over 160 people from the swirling seas. As wind and water hammered Florida's northwest Gulf Coast, other areas of the state were being pounded by a tremendous line of severe storms. Trees and power lines fell from Tallahassee to West Palm Beach. Ironically, a tornado touched down in Dade County, destroying one of the tent cities built to house those who had lost everything to Hurricane Andrew.
We actually observed the funnel cloud just above us. And once I got my heart out of my mouth and looked out the window, we saw that the tents were just blowing away. And we literally lost 24 tents right then within a matter of minutes.
All residents were evacuated. Later, they returned to find their temporary homes demolished.
A terrible experience. It was a heartbreaking experience to see the little things that I save and I have with my kids, my 5 kids, I lose everything again. And I had to start all over again, fresh.
Once again, across Florida, people are picking up the pieces and starting over. Like those inflicted by Hurricane Andrew, the scars from this storm will not easily heal.
I relive it when I go to bed. The people that lost their life, and I can't help but blame myself because I couldn't get to them. But God was merciful, and He saved my life.
In Florida, Superstorm 93 ravaged the state with severe storms and flooding. To the north, the storm took on a different but just as deadly face.
Icy roads can be a problem even for professional drivers. To feel secure about winter driving, travel on the road the ice with salt. Halite, the same rock salt the pros use on highways. Tests show that salt reduces accidents by 88.3%. So when you drive, stay on the road the ice with salt.
Now, your local forecast, accurate and dependable from the Weather Channel. Coming up, a look at your local radar. But first, the current local conditions. Today's regional forecast. Your local 36-hour forecast from the National Weather Service. Current local radar showing any precipitation in your area. Intensity is indicated by the color code at the top of the screen.
The storm came on shore during the course of the night on the panhandle of Florida, then moved northeast across Georgia. At the same time, there's some very cold air coming in the upper part of the atmosphere. The combination of the two caused heavy snow to begin falling across many places that Friday night and that Saturday morning.
It howled northward from the Gulf of Mexico and into the deep south. Residents at first looked forward to a nice dusting of snow just in time for the weekend. But soon their joyous anticipation was replaced by the shock of a deadly blizzard, in some places like none that had been seen in more than 100 years. The weight of ice and snow felled trees, which blocked roads and downed power lines over much of the southeast.
Who'd believe a little bit of snow caused this much trouble?
For these folks in Atlanta, falling trees created a more immediate danger than loss of power. Trees came crashing down on their house.
I just heard this loud thud, and Bill was in one of the back rooms working, and I heard him scream, "Oh my gosh," and I knew something was wrong then.
Motorists in the South, unaccustomed to driving in even minor snowstorms, were caught off guard by the blizzard. This tow truck operator was waiting for a truck to tow him out when a camera crew arrived.
What are you going to have to do? Let's call a wrecker for a wrecker. Get me out.
Interstate 75 was closed at the Tennessee-Georgia line for days. Northbound vehicles backed up for more than 80 miles.
Got to go back south. It's shut down. Should be open sometime late this evening.
Many travelers were students heading back from spring break in Florida, out of food and money, forced to turn back to the south. Emergency vehicles fared no better than others. Delays in transit meant that many fires, which in normal weather might have been quickly doused, burned out of control. Much of the property damage in the South was caused by the snow itself. Buildings which were not designed to carry the load wilted under the weight of the snow and ice.
While the center of the surface low pressure system was still in Georgia, heavy snow was breaking out hundreds of miles in advance of the center of the low. So you did have heavy snowfall rates covering much of the eastern seaboard at the same time.
When the leading edge of the storm reached the Smoky Mountains, backpackers unaware of the storm's magnitude began to feel its bite. Military helicopters were called in to rescue stranded hikers in and around the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Among them, from Detroit, a group of more than 100 students and their chaperones. They were part of an outward bound program in the mountains to try out their survival skills. What they wound up with was the test of a lifetime, and they passed.
Well, we just dug ourselves out and decided that the best thing to do would just be stay there until we thought we could walk out, until the snow was broken in enough, I guess.
I was just so positive. I tried to be so positive the whole time. And it got hard, but we made it.
300 miles from the Smokies, fierce waves crashed onto the entire length of the Carolina coast. An amateur photographer grabbed these dramatic shots of a pier on Surfside Beach, South Carolina. It was battered by waves for hours, and finally, it gave way.
This had a very strong surge of wind coming around the bottom of the storm from the south and west. And it was this surge of wind which contributed to all the wild weather in Florida, and then also caused the extremely strong winds along the South Carolina coast.
As the storm moved up the coast, these winds continued. Just south of New York, on the Jersey shore, the town of Seabright braced for the oncoming killer storm. The isthmus on which Seabright sits is but 100 yards wide. It separates the Shrewsbury River from the raging Atlantic. And when the blizzard came through, the ocean poured over the seawall, across the isthmus, and into the river, flooding the town. This woman was trying to get to her boyfriend's house. She was rescued by a New York area television news crew, which found her surrounded by a rising tide of ice and water. National Guard troops evacuated most of Seabright's 1,800 residents. It's getting to be a routine. The town has taken several beatings by the weather in recent years. Last December, a nor'easter drove the ocean higher than did the March blizzard. Some residents have had enough of evacuating and rebuilding. Among those, Chuck and Virginia Seiden, who've rented out the house they've owned for 10 years and have moved inland. They have a 9-month-old baby, and Virginia can't take the thought of going through another storm.
It concerned me being trapped. If there was ever an emergency and I had to get the baby to a hospital or had to leave and was not able to leave, that was very frightening to me.
The brunt of snowfall in the blizzard was up the spine of the Appalachians and across Pennsylvania. As in the south, roads, power lines, and buildings were impacted. The surface low pressure moved into upstate New York, an area where heavy snowfall is common, but not this heavy. Even in Syracuse, the storm set a record for snowfall in a single storm at well over 40 inches. In New York City, residents dug their way out quickly, but freezing temperatures made road clearing more difficult than usual. Airports in New York were typical of those from Florida to Maine. As the blizzard came through, many airports closed, and most flights were either canceled or delayed. As the storm moved up the coast of New England, the same winds that swept the Carolinas and New Jersey whipped the sea up to ominous levels. Residents were expecting the worst, but a last-minute shift in wind direction just before high tide reduced the coastal flooding. For Mainers, the storm only amounted to a bit more inconvenience than the average winter storm. From Maine, the storm headed up the Canadian coast and out into the North Atlantic, leaving behind a swath of destruction covering the entire eastern third of the U.S.
By whatever measure you wish to make, whether it's the overall circulation pattern, the total extent of the storm damage all the way from Florida through Maine, the total amount of snow dropped on this nation, not the depth at any one place, but the total volume of snow, is tremendously impressive numbers when you start to see the expanse of the storm, the depth of the storm, the intensity of the storm, all the way from Florida to Maine, all the way from Ohio to the coast.
Call the Weather Channel Connection, 1-900-WEATHER. For just 95 cents a minute, you can connect and get the weather for over 900 cities worldwide.
Once in your lifetime comes the magic of truly great music. Loved by millions around the world, these are the greatest romantic melodies of our time. Of today's most memorable and relaxing hits. Piano by Candlelight. On 3 cassettes for only $19.99, or 2 compact discs for just $24.99.
To order Piano by Candlelight, use your credit card to call 1-800-648-1700 or send $19.99 for 3 cassettes or $24.99 for 2 compact discs, plus $4 shipping and handling. To Piano by Candlelight, P.O. Box 11066, Department 140, Chicago, Illinois, 60611.
If you're about to travel, watch the 5-Day Business Planner here on the Weather Channel at 20 minutes after every hour. You get a comprehensive national report that covers the forecast over the next 5 days. Watch the 5-Day Business Planner coming up soon on the Weather Channel. Now, your local forecast, accurate and dependable from the Weather Channel. Coming up, a look at your local radar. But first, the 36-hour forecast from the National Weather Service. The extended forecast. The current local radar showing any precipitation in your area. Intensity is indicated by the color code at the top of the screen.
Sunday, March 11, 1888. A blizzard meteorologists say only happens once in 500 years. Like the 93 blizzard, it was a mid-March storm. The two storms formed in much the same way, but the blizzard of 88 ravaged New York and New England for 2.5 days.
Well, it started raining actually in New York City in the late afternoon on Sunday. And as the afternoon went on, it got colder and colder and colder, and the temperature dropped from the 50s to the 40s to the 30s. And then shortly after that, as the evening went on, the rain changed to snow. The snow began to come down and began to accumulate 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. Not only did it accumulate, the winds began to pick up. So by the time we got toward the midnight hour, we were looking at a full-fledged blizzard in New York City, which raged on until really Tuesday morning.
400 people died in the 1888 blizzard, 200 of those in New York City. Transportation came to a crashing halt. Trains derailed throughout the region. Everyone was stranded. It took weeks to recover from the storm. Snow drifted and piled over second-story windows. It was carried out of cities in rail cars, tons and tons of it. This storm would have been devastating if there had been warning, but there was none.
Well, the forecast for that day was basically increasing clouds, some rain during the afternoon, which was a Sunday afternoon, and temperatures maybe in the 50s and falling down to the 40s.
But where the 88 forecast failed, meteorologists in 1993 saw their big storm coming days in advance. And yet the death toll seems enormous for our times, more than any other single weather event in the United States since the day of the killer tornadoes in 1974. Most could have been avoided if the victims had heeded the warnings. Dr. Brooke Fishoff is a psychologist at the Carnegie Mellon University. He studies why people take risks and how they make decisions.
One of the things that's particularly surprising about this storm is that the weather forecasters said with such great confidence that this storm was coming. We're not kidding this time. And when they promised us a big storm, there was some percentage of us who said, well, this is just like other promises in the past. I've got important things to do. I'll probably be able to get through. Of course, they're unhappy when, they may be unhappy or worse when things don't work out, and it's easy for us to criticize them in hindsight. So conceivably, those are rational. Those are rational decisions. It's just hard to see the rationality when they haven't worked out.
Travis Archer was a victim of this storm. He loved fast cars and 4x4s. Friday night of the storm, he and 7 of his friends set out in 2 Jeeps for the North Georgia mountains. Travis did not return. Gary Davenport, Travis's brother-in-law, was part of that tragic outing. He's a hunter, outdoorsman, trained in survival.
We was all ready to go. It's something to do. You don't see snow that much around here when you hear something like that. You want to go play in it. It wasn't so bad until we turned off on a little Jeep road. That's the one we got stuck on. Trees was just, they were falling over the road, and we had an axe. We'd get out and chop them into and go on.
When the first Jeep got stuck, all 8 people got into the second one and tried to turn back, but huge trees blocked the dirt road, and they were stranded.
You can hear trees popping. Wind. It was getting worse, I could tell.
Saturday at daylight, with the blizzard still raging, Travis Archer and Bobby Hobbs decided to walk for help. Sunday morning was even colder than Saturday. With no heat in the Jeep, they were desperate. The group decided they had to walk out.
I had on a pair of tennis shoes. I had on a pretty good pair of briskets. I had a line around them. I had on a t-shirt and a thin jacket. Snow was above your knees, and my leg was numb from knee After I got dry, my hands was all right because I kept them in my pockets. And it was painful until it just got numb and you couldn't feel it.
They were rescued Sunday evening, all but Travis Archer. Travis had frozen to death Saturday night while he and Bobby Hobbs slept in the open.
Obviously, each death is its own tragedy, and it has its own story. I think there are perhaps a number of things about this particular storm that may have caught people unawares. I think one is that the sheer magnitude of the storm was I think outside of many people's experience. Think about the category of event that you're dealing with and say, gee, if this is something that I don't have a lot of first-hand experience with or haven't been trained in, there are likely to be some surprises hidden here. I don't know what those surprises are, but there are likely to be some. So if somebody tells you there's the storm of the century and you're less than a century old, then presumably there are some surprises hidden here, and you probably ought to adopt a generally cautious policy.
Gary Davenport learned that lesson.
Not to go out playing in it, and if it's going to be a dangerous snow, you know. You never do know what can happen. Just, I'd call all my friends that's got four-wheel drives and tell them to stay in the house for one. It can get dangerous quick.
The Superstorm of '93 was beyond most of our experience. Few have ever seen anything like it, and it didn't end when the sun came out Sunday, March 14th. There was enough moisture in the snow that fell in this storm to fill the Mississippi River for 40 days. And when the snow melted, the runoff swamped towns and cities all along the eastern seaboard. Floodwaters forced residents out of their homes from West Virginia to Massachusetts. It will be months before we've tallied the full extent of the damage from this storm. It was the fourth largest catastrophe in the U.S. in terms of insured damage. Some estimate the total damage will be from $3.5 to $4 billion. And the death toll was higher than in any weather disaster in this country for almost 20 years. 26 states were hit. It affected more than 50% of the nation's population. It joins the ranks of the storms of legend, storms we tell our children and our children's children about, like the blizzard of '88, the hurricane of '35, the superstorm of '93.
Icy roads can be a problem even for professional drivers. To feel secure about winter driving, travel on road the iced with salt. Halite, the same rock salt the pros use on highways. Tests show that salt reduces accidents by 88.3%. So when you drive, stay on the road the iced with salt.